Hi, welcome back. I'm James from Other Pixel Games and this is my coding journey. It's week 3 and 4 of this journey and it's been a weird one. I did everything I set out to do and more, but in the middle and at the end there were a couple of big breaks in my progress where I took part in a game jam. Click here to watch the video on how I did, and then went on holiday to celebrate my anniversary. I don't have a video about that though, sorry. But I still have a couple of weeks of work to chat about, so let's jump right in there. In this week, as I mentioned before, I wanted to continue to work on abilities. I got a bomb in by creating a prefab that once it spawned, it waited a predetermined number of seconds, then set off an explosion method, which looked for everything assigned to either the enemy or player layers within a set distance and dealt damage to it. Then once that was built, I had it so that when you hit a certain button, it would instantiate one of these bombs. Initially I had it appearing on the player, but eventually figured out how to have it so that it was offset so that it appeared in front of the player. After that, I decided that I wanted to get the famous hook shot into the game. This was a tougher ability to get in and required a few things I hadn't worked with before, though to be fair that's true of a lot of things since this was only my third week coding properly. I started out similarly to the enemy work that I did, using a raycast that I fired whenever I pressed the button for the ability. If the raycast hit an object on the obstacle layer, it would tween the player object from the point it was at to the point you hit with a bit of code called lerping. The thing that was new to me was the line renderer that I added to make it show what was happening. Whenever the player fired the hookshot, if it was able to hit a wall, it would create a line from the player to the part of the wall it hit, then as the player moved towards the wall, it shrank the line as if it were retracting. The way it works was more complicated than I expected it to be, because a line isn't like a standard game object with a scale, instead it's a series of smaller game objects. You can't just lower the size of the line, instead you have to update the locations of the ends of the line each frame. Thankfully we already know where those ends were. They were the player position and the position on the wall we raycast, so by passing those values into the line each frame, it looked like the hookshot is retracting. The next thing I did was take a step back from creating new things to organise things a bit better. At this point, all the abilities were on their own buttons, but I knew that at some point I wanted the abilities to be items that you equip into slots, so I took my first steps towards that. Moving everything off of the character controller made all of this much easier. All I really had to do was create a middleman script that held the ability scripts in a list. Add a new interface, like with my interact work, that ensure that each ability used the same method to activate, then make it so that when the character controller pressed the button, it would use the method from whichever script was at the top of the list. I also added 2 more buttons that would change which ability was at the top of the list, and just like that, it was done and usable. The game was a little bit harder to understand now, but fixing that had to wait because this is where I had to work on the GMTK Game Jam. I spoke about the Game Jam last week, so I won't talk about it again here, but here's the link again. That ran from Thursday to Sunday, then I took the next few days off to recover, so it was a week before I got back to it. But before I jumped onto the game jam, like every week, I made a list of things I wanted to do. I wanted to give the ranged weapon and the bomb ability ammo, then I wanted to create drops for them. There were some bugs I wanted to fix, and after all this work on making abilities modular, I realised that it made sense to remove them from the player game object. So that was my plan moving forward. Time for week 2. I got the bugs out of the way quickly, so quickly that I don't actually remember what they were. This was a few weeks ago now, so I'm sorry about that. And started working on the features I wanted to get in. First was ammo and items to replenish it, both of which were fairly simple with what I had learned so far. A quick inventory script with a few floats gave me the ammo and their max ammo, then creating an item that when you entered its trigger area, it would update the inventory and destroy itself had the drops working. To get them to spawn, I basically just used the bomb spawning code again, but triggered it when the enemy went to 0 health instead of me pressing a button. After that, I whipped up a basic UI HUD that showed which ability was active and how much ammo it had, if it had ammo, and how much health I had, using a combination of what I learned from the Jams UI and some more interface stuff to decide whether or not it should show the ammo UI. Speaking of the Jam, after working with art and audio for the whole weekend, I realised that while I wasn't at the stage where I needed art yet, it did make the whole process easier to understand, and a little bit more fun. So I decided to get in a character and a basic environment. Since it was still only for learning code, I did this by swiping some free assets from the Unity asset store. I found this fun little spaceman and added him to the game, hooked up the animations using Unity's blend tree system that let me easily set which animations to use depending on which direction I was walking. Thankfully, the character came with an environment tile palette, so I added a basic environment as well. This wasn't what I wanted the final version to look like. It wasn't the right style or even the right genre, but it was slightly whimsical and fun to look at, so for now it was fine. There was a downside to this work, however. Now that the player had animations, the way I was doing attacks and arrows looked weird. I didn't fix this yet though. I'm still kind of on the fence about it. I'll certainly fix the attack, I just don't see a world where I'd want the melee sword slash or whatever to not be in the direction that the player's facing, but the arrows, the hookshot, even the bombs, they might be better if it was still linked to the mouse or the right stick, in which case I'd need to come up with a solution similar to Enter the Gungeon or Cult of the Lamb. I then also got in some background music just so it was there, and of course put in a magic attack and mana since I joked that I'd do that the week before. The last thing I was planning to do this week was move the player's abilities off of the player and onto the ability manager. I realised that if I eventually wanted to make the abilities into equipable items, then it would make more sense if all the abilities were on the items, and the first step to that was getting them off the player. Some of them were easy to move, but others were a little harder. The majority of the issues I had were because originally the abilities referenced whatever they were attached to, but now they were attached to the ability manager. So instead of firing the hookshot out of the player, it would fire from some random point wherever the empty game object I'd placed down for the ability manager technically was in world space. After fixing all that up, I did still have a little time, and so I got lighting in. I'd worked with lighting in Unity before, in employed projects and in the Metroidvania, so I had some idea what was going on, except none of the things I wanted to use were there. I spent ages searching until in the end I realised that I was used to working in Unreal Engine's universal render pipeline, and for some reason I hadn't chosen that option when making this project. So I quickly set all that up and I had my freeform lights. I put them in and suddenly I had a thought. These should be flickery when they come on. I spent a little time experimenting with lighting and triggers and realised that while I could have it so that the lights turned off and on again quickly over a second, there was a better way. Instead of turning them off, I just raised and lowered the amount of light they gave off, their luminosity. Using some random number generation, I had the game flick the light up and down over a short period, which looked way better than just turning the light off. And with that I was done. I quickly decided what to do next week, and the week came to an end. I decided to continue making things modular, add more spells, add items, and also fix the attack to be based on the look direction. This all seemed like the right direction for what I was doing, but, well, spoilers, due to a couple of things, including sickness and spookiness, my plan completely changes at the beginning of next week. If you want to know how, come back for the next video and see the new plan. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you're enjoying this, and I'll see you next time.